Welcome to Breakout Room 2 for the Integrating Science and Social Studies into the Elementary Classroom session. I'm Emily Satterley with the P3 team, and I'll be your host for this session. We will be recording the session, and I will be monitoring the chat box. If anyone has any questions during the session, feel free to drop those into the chat box, and I will keep an eye on those. Our presenters this afternoon are Emily Hurst and Ashley Smith, Learning Acceleration Specialist from KCEC. I want to thank Jennifer and Ashley for being, not Jennifer, I'm sorry. I want to thank Emily and Ashley for being with us to present this afternoon. I'll keep an eye on the time and let you know when we have 2 minutes left. We're excited to hear from you today, so now I will turn the session over to you.
Great, thank you, Emily. Can you hear and see us okay? Okay. Hi, welcome to Embedding Science and Social Studies into the Elementary Class.
I'm Ashley Smith, and I'm one of the Learning Acceleration Specialists here at CKEC, and we're excited to spend this 30 minutes with you today.
I'm Emily Hurst. I'm also the other Learning Acceleration Specialist at CKEC. Both Ashley and I come from the elementary background, so we bring the fun to our educational cooperative. I've been predominantly in Scott County, and she's been predominantly in Jessamine County. We are very, very excited. And if you have any questions, yes, we do come as a package deal. So we call this our talk show, and we're very excited to present for you today. On today's agenda, we promised you the top 3 strategies on how to get science and social studies into your elementary instructional block, especially into reading. We're going to do that in 3 different ways. So here's, if you get nothing else, here are the top 3 ways to do it. You've got to build that student's background knowledge. You got to work in that interdisciplinary critical thinking, and you need to make sure that you are creating engaging learning experiences. If you've done any kind of training at CKEC, you have seen this before. We call this the trunk of the tree. The trunk of the tree is important because we want to make sure that your trunk or your core systems of your school are healthy and strong and supportive. All of these items that are up in the branches are excellent ways to drive student achievement, but they are not the core of everything. Without strong units and strong lessons, then your school will not be able to succeed. Your students will not be able to succeed. And eventually the branches will, well, die. So today we're going to be talking about integration. What does it mean to integrate? Well, it basically means to unite or to blend in together. Here is a quote from the National Council for Social Studies: "A purposeful teaching approach that draws on knowledge, skills, and methods of inquiry from multiple subject areas in addressing topics that have relevance to the world beyond school." I pulled out 3 very important parts of this quote. This teaching approach is purposeful. This is not instruction that is happening on accident. This is not instruction that is put into an hour on a Friday morning. This is really intentional and purposeful teaching. You're doing multiple subject areas at once because why are we teaching in the first place? We want them to have these skills and this knowledge to go beyond school. Yes, we want them to understand dates. Yes, we want them to understand scientific concepts, but really we want them to be 21st century learners, and integration is a great way to do that. So here is something that we call an inclusion activity at CKEC. I realize we only have 30 minutes together, but I would like for you to please take a look at these 4 pictures. You can either unmute, you can drop it in the chat, or we will sit here awkwardly for about 15 seconds. How has integration been in your building or within your district? Or when you think of integration, what is it that you think about?
And link it to one of the pictures.
Oh yes, thank you. Link it to one of these pictures. Not a right or wrong answer.
Integration is like shopping because you take all the different components and put it together to make something.
Love it.
Ooh, Thank you, Sandra. That's a great metaphor for it. I sometimes think the integration is like lightning. You kind of don't know when to expect it. A lot of times it can scatter a lot of different ways, but it has a whole bunch of power if harnessed correctly. What about you, Ashley?
I kind of think of the racehorse, because I think sometimes we learn new curriculum or we get something new and we want to just shoot out of that gate so fast, but really in order to be to win a race, you really have to go in it and have practice and think about things and just take a steady pace before you can really be successful.
Thank you. Background knowledge might not be something that you have considered before as you're thinking about successful ways to integrate your science and social studies into the rest of your instruction. This is a 2-minute and 35-second video from Edutopia discussing the importance of background knowledge. I'm not sure if you're familiar with the baseball study. It's quite something. If you want to read further into that, I would love to talk with you more about that. Thinking about that metaphor of it being Velcro, and you're sitting there saying, well, I can't open up these kids' brains and just put that knowledge in there that I wish that they had. Something that we encourage, Ashley and I, within our jobs is to accelerate some of that learning. We might suggest one strategy is to teach some of that a week ahead. Teach a week ahead of yourself, whether you're doing it with phonics, whether you're doing it with specific content knowledge. You know your students.
Vocabulary.
Oh yeah, vocabulary. You know kind of what they will have coming in and maybe what they've not been exposed to. And so doing it in advance will help those students whenever they hear it. Oh, I know all about this. We talked about this last week. And that you have created the beginning of that Velcro. I'm really glad that you reminded me to talk about the vocabulary as well. Pre-teaching that vocabulary for some of those students who have a hard time latching onto some of those concepts will really give you a high return on your investment.
I'm sure most of you have seen this, or at least saw it, because it is part of the new science of reading, but Scarborough's reading rope. So many times in the elementary classroom, we really start thinking about that word recognition part of the rope, and we dabble a little bit in the comprehension part, but we don't go into it and dig into it like we really should. Because if you look at that language comprehension part of the rope, the vocabulary knowledge and that background knowledge, that is part of the rope. So we have to make sure that we're making time to consider that, because if not, we might have fluent readers and we might be teaching them all the things that they need to do as far as finding the evidence. But if they don't have that background knowledge, if we're not teaching some vocabulary, they're not gonna, it's gonna be harder for them to learn. So what is it that we're needing to integrate? So this is normally a full day training that we do, and we've condensed it down to 30 minutes. But for today's purpose, we're really focusing on a very short version of how we're going to be able to look at the KAS ELA standards and social studies or science standards and embed those together. There are ways to do embed math as well, and KDE has some resources out there for you that you could look into that. But for today's focus, we're going to talk about the ELA integration with science and social studies. So whenever we're thinking about doing this, we have to really think about clarity. We can't just start a program and just running through it. We really need to make sure we have clarity of those standards. And it can be tricky because I'm sure, as you know, ELA standards, social studies standards, science and math, they are not all written the same way. So we have to make sure we're taking time to dig into those standards and know exactly what it is that we're wanting our students to learn. What verbs are we looking at? What content do they need to know? And how are we going to make sure that we're teaching to the high level of the standard and that verb? So that's where you have to start, is that clarity. Once you have clarity of your standards, so you have a success criteria or ICANN statements of those standards, a great place where you can start is then looking, putting those ELA ICANN statements and those social studies and science standards, or looking at those and seeing where they overlap. With social studies and science, the best place to start with that is really thinking about those inquiry standards. And we'll talk more about that in a few minutes for social studies. And then again, Emily will dig into that, what that looks like with science. But this is a great place to start, is looking at that academic vocabulary and how you can look at that clarity of those standards and how they do actually intertwine together. So where do we start? Where do we start doing this? It takes us thinking about planning. And our traditional model that we've used for so long is, we start with that standard, and we might or might not get the clarity of the standard. And then we just start going right into those tasks and those activities that are so fun and engaging, because that's what we want. All of us want our kids to be engaged and have fun in this learning, which is great. But whenever we go at this approach and we haven't thought about assessment strategies yet or the learning outcomes yet, then we kind of get ourselves into a mess where this visual, this Mr. Potato Head, you got all the pieces, but they're just not all in the right place, and it's disproportioned, and it can be a mess. So where we need to start is thinking about the backwards design. So really thinking about that clarity that we were just talking about. What does that clarity look like? What is the learning outcomes? What assessment strategies are we going to use in those task instructional activities that we're going to use? So really thinking about that backwards approach instead of the standard approach. And when we do this, then we get a happy Mr. Potato Head with everything in the right order, and hopefully our learning is going to be a lot more successful for our students. So how do we do this? So we're going to take a quick dip into how to do this with social studies. We'll take a really quick glance at the architecture, and then and look at those inquiry standards and how those can come into play with integrating. So this is a visual that Emily actually helped me make, because I was like, it's like, well, actually, I think you said it's like an Oreo. I'm like, yes, it is. So the standards are built, and they're in this color. So the inquiry standards consist of that questioning and investigating. And in that middle is that content. So that's kind of, you think about like all the things that we have to teach, what things we're going to teach within civics, economics, geography, and history. That's like the yummy filling in the middle of the Oreo. And then underneath that, we have our using evidence and communicating conclusions. So it is all these things that have to go together to make sure that we're teaching those social studies standards well. Because if we just teach the facts and we just teach the dates and there's just not, the students aren't engaged in learning, and so they're not going to memorize those dates, they're not going to memorize those names, and they're not going to see the connection of how all these content areas actually do work together to really affect our lives every day.
Could you double stuff your Oreo as well?
Yes, it's you could definitely double stuff your Oreo, and it's actually best practice to do that, to be able do some when you're creating like a unit, to look at some civics things and some geography things that are based on that same content and the same main idea. If you're learning about revolution, the Revolutionary War, you would want to talk about those different areas of social studies so they could see the history of it and where it was and how it affected geography and economics and civics. This is a great visual that really helps, like for me, like whenever I'm thinking about planning a unit or thinking about how this all works, I love this visual because the strong line that I put in the middle, that top part is that assessment part. So those questioning, the questions that we're asking, those compelling questions that we're using for our unit, and those supporting questions that we use to guide instruction every day, those have to match how our students are going to communicate their claims, because that's how you match that assessment piece. And then you're using your evidence and investigating using those disciplinary concepts. That's how students engage with or analyze those primary and secondary sources in investigating. So this is just a great visual to help kind of see that a little bit better. And then when thinking about designing a unit, we know that the social studies standards have, you have to start your question, investigate, use evidence, and communicate. Those are the things that we just talked about. And how we can tie that with ELA is when you think about your question, that's what's driving the focus of your content. That's how, like, we are learning about this, and what big idea do we want our students to know at the end of this unit. And then we're going to investigate using those 4 discipline strands and standards. Then we're going to use evidence, and that's where you can really look at those ELA verbs like find, evaluate, select to answer questions. Those are those ELA verbs that we can use to help tie that ELA standard with the using evidence inquiry standard. And then the communicate, that's those verbs of explain, argue. How are they going to communicate their learning? What does that assessment look like? And so that's a great way to think about the big picture of designing a unit to be able to embed social studies into your ELA or vice versa.
Thank you, Ashley.
You're welcome.
That's a lot of information.
It is a
And if
lot.
you want to know more, we are extremely passionate about clarity of standards. We do an entire 6-day training just on social studies standards or just on science standards. So again, we love to help. We would love to partner with you on that. That being said, how do we integrate science? Well, we're going to talk a little bit about the architecture, and then we're going to talk about a model that you could choose to use. When you pull up your science standards, this is what it looks like. It's extremely overwhelming. However, what I've circled or boxed here is the standard. This is the actual standard itself in the flesh. And all of these things else have all been combined to make that standard. If you kind of think about the multidimensionality in the ELA standards, if you're familiar with that, it's kind of like they've brought these 3 different colors together in order to make that standard. Now, what's a little bit confusing about science, in my opinion, is that the orange is the only thing that ever changes, really. The blue and the green have different concepts within them, but those concepts, maybe there's 8 of them for cross-cutting concepts. Those are the same ones they're going to be using K-12. Same thing for science and engineering practices. K-12, they're going to be planning and carrying out investigations. They're going to be doing these other practices within there. And so your content is the only thing that's really going to change. When thinking about the breakdown of these science standards, in the blue, it is actually what students are doing. It's how you're going to assess. For this standard 3 PS 2-1, your students need to plan and conduct an investigation. If your students are not planning and conducting the investigation, you are not getting to the full depth and rigor of the standard. As I said, the orange is the content. This is what students are actually learning. And then in the green, these cross-cutting concepts. This is how students are thinking and processing as they are engaging with their content. Within this standard, we want them to be thinking about the cause and effect of balanced and unbalanced forces. The really neat thing about science standards is that those green cross-cutting concepts were created to be interdisciplinary with other standards. You're going to be talking about cause and effect in math. You're going to be talking about cause and effect even within social studies and within your RI standards. So if you are looking for a place to start integrating, thinking about those green cross-cutting concepts within the science standards are a great bridge to get into your integrating with your RI standards. How can you design the unit? There are lots of different ways to do it. One way that I have liked to do it in the past is to use something called the 5E model. Again, I would love to talk about this for 6 hours. I'm just giving you the quick version of this. The 5E model is not the boss of you, but it is a framework that you could use to organize your science unit. And if nothing else, you say, Emily and Ashley, this is way too much information. When you're designing a science unit, you could use a storyline structure. You're familiar with storylines, you're familiar with teaching beginning, middle, and end, and there are a lot of resources that we will give you that even have the storylines already laid out for you. What we want when we're integrating is instruction that is less of these things on the left. We do not want science and social studies instruction that's just one right answer, where the teacher is the keeper of all of the information. And what we want is students being open-ended and doing a lot of the thinking and a lot of the talking. If only the teacher is thinking and talking, they're not actually learning or retaining anything. We would be remiss if we did not talk about one of our favorite tools to use within integrating science and social studies. There is a link here. Our friends on the deeper learning team here at CKEC have an entire module on hexagonal thinking. I've given you some examples here of ones that are primary and elementary based. I believe these are science, and there's one social studies within there. But you've got students creating these webs of concepts, and they're having to defend their thinking. So if you're interested in learning more about hexagonal thinking, we have a Padlet that we're going to give you that has a bunch of resources, or you can take the on-demand module from our friends. I would highly encourage you to ensure that your staff and teachers are teaching science and social studies. A lot of times we have students who are quote unquote bad at reading or math. It just doesn't come as easy to them. And we want to encourage them to have an end to reading and math with something that they're already excited about. If they're excited about dinosaurs, let's use that as an entry point into integrating with the other subjects. We're all after the same goal. You want to make sure that within your building, you are collaborating with them. And one place that you may not have thought about is collaborating with your specials. If your specials teachers can know the content that you're going to be teaching, especially those library media specialists, and even within gym and music, they can use that to embed some of that content into their instruction. The more places the kids can see it and see it and hear it and go across subjects, the more likely they are to retain it. Collaborating builds up to authentic integration, which is what we're after.
All right, so I'm going to take us home because we're almost out of time. But so when we think about what we talked about today, we talked about that clarity of the standards and that success criteria and learning targets. That is the huge piece of the work. That planning the unit design is something that really should be done early on. So that whenever you come to PLCs, that your teachers are able to use that PLC time to think about those activities that they're going to design, or opportunities to respond, those engaging activities and opportunities to respond. It's going to make their planning so much more meaningful, and they can actually walk away and have aligned activities and opportunities to respond that are have been laid out with that success criteria and standards. So thinking about big picture planning, there's lots of things that you could think about, but here's just some ideas to leave you with. So consider how students will communicate their learning. What is mastery? What does that look like? And I highly encourage that your students also know what that looks like. Background knowledge students will need to be able to have access to the learning, and think about those vocabulary words. So we have tier 2 and tier 3, and our tier 2 vocabulary words, we could go into a whole training on this too, but our tier 2 are those academic vocabulary that are so important for our students to know, understand the concepts that they're learning. And those tier 3 are those words that they might be learning within a content, like revolution, yeah.
Colonists.
So just thinking about those. And then social studies, combining, the easiest way to get started is look at those inquiry standards to be able to align those with ELA. And for the science, look at those 3D standards with ELA. There's not, is there a magic pacing guide? I gave this, I spoiled it. But the picture's still cute. But no, there's not a magic facing guide. I wish there was. And if you come up with one, I guarantee you'll probably be a millionaire because everybody wants the magic facing guide to be able to get this done. And sadly, we just don't have it. But I wish I could give it to you. This is the Padlet that we talked about. This is a resource that's live. We are constantly adding to it. So I highly suggest you write down the bit.ly or scan the QR code. This has tons of resources. I think we have time really quick just to show you. We've got stuff for background knowledge, social studies planning, science planning, social studies resources, passage resources, vocab. I mean, there's all kinds of stuff in here. So it's worth your time to dig in. If you ever are looking for something and need something, we probably have something in there for you. So this concludes our training, but we also want to make sure you know that CKEC, we are two of the specialists here, and we have lots of things we can offer throughout our co-op. But some things that me and Emily do is we do follow-up meetings in PLCs, we do coaching within PLCs, we do online modules, in-person and virtual trainings. If you ever just have a question about something or a resource, you can email us at any time, and we're always happy to help. Oh, and I could not leave this out, but if you have not heard about Central Kentucky's EduCon yet, I highly suggest you check it out. We're really excited about it. In June, we have two keynote speakers,
Ron
Clark and
Dave
Burgess. For some, I keep on mixing up Dave and Ron's name, so I don't know why. But anyways, we're really excited about it, and we hope to see you there. Does anybody have any questions?
Go ahead, Emily.
Sorry.
I was just going to say the same thing. Does anybody have any questions? There were a few notes added in the chat box. So if you haven't had a chance to look at those, you might want to do that. But thank you, Emily and Ashley, for sharing with us today. We have a 10-minute break built in, and then we're going to break off to meet with your co-op leaders. So you're welcome to join your co-op whenever you are ready. And if you'd like to stay in this session for a few minutes to ask some questions, you're welcome to do that. And I definitely want to remind everyone, after your co-op meetings, please remember to complete the EdCamp feedback and ELA request form, which is linked to the grid. So thank you again, ladies.
Thank you.
Thank you.